have never experienced the rural life. They are simply living in a farmer's household without the right type of accommodation, without the right type of sanitary facilities, as simple as showering. So that won't really keep them for long. So therefore, the institutional structure is very important to attract them rather than push them. And the other is that they must be able to experience sort of a selection through the market, because if they cannot really generate enough value for those rural areas, and they won't be able to be kept for long. So therefore, this is really a mutual process. The government play a role, and they also have to exercise their own capacity and prove their value in this countryside.
And thankfully, because of the infrastructure development in China's rural community nowadays, like transportation, interconnectivity, and access to internet, maybe today's younger generation will also find it pretty easy to access a modern lifestyle when they move to countryside. But thank you very much. We have been speaking with Professor Liu Baochen with the University of International Business and Economics. You're listening to World Today. Bye for now.
Hello everyone, this is Noor Ahmed Khan, currently based in Tsinghua University. World Today is an excellent initiative to discuss current affairs by including experts from across the globe. I've always enjoyed our thought-provoking discussions and wish the team even more success and impact in the future.
Hi, I'm Einar Tangen, a political and economic analyst and senior fellow at the Independent Haihe Institute. World Today is news without the hype and business commentary that is informed and up to date, presenting the facts and asking incisive questions. So, join us if you are someone who needs to know what is happening in China as it is happening.
With in-depth discussions on current affairs from across the globe, World Today brings you updates, analysis, and interviews on the day's top stories. 15 minutes a day, 5 days a week, at 7 p.m. Beijing time.
This is CGTN Radio. Hear the difference.
Now the news. I'm Shane Bigham. Chinese President Xi Jinping is calling for nationwide action to make waters lucid and mountains lush and write a new chapter in building a beautiful China through planting trees. He made the remarks while participating in a voluntary tree planting activity in Beijing. The president said green development is a major strategy for China's current and future development. He also called for efforts to launch voluntary tree planting activities nationwide. French President Emmanuel Macron's in China for a 3-day visit. He's scheduled to meet with Chinese President Xi Jinping and other leaders. Dai Kai has more.
It is a highly anticipated visit. Macron has expressed this willingness to promote dialogue and cooperation between Europe and China. As early as when he was at the G20 summit in Bali last year, President Macron's visit is expected to play a really important role in restarting and strengthening the relationship between China and France in the post-pandemic era, especially next year marks the 60th anniversary of the diplomatic ties between the two countries. And the cooperation projects between the two countries cover infrastructure, environmental protection, and new energy, and with a total value of over $1.7 billion. So moving forward, more cooperation is expected in civil nuclear energy, aviation, aerospace, health, agricultural and food products, and tourism.
Turkey says it can resolve disputes with Greece through peaceful means and dialogue. The two countries' defense ministers have held talks in the Turkish province of Hatay after they toured areas devastated by powerful earthquakes in February. The meeting is the latest sign of easing tensions between the rival neighbors, which have resumed high-level meetings in the wake of the quakes. Tensions flared in 2020 over exploratory drilling rights in the eastern Mediterranean. Finnish Prime Minister Sanna Marin announced that she'll step down as the chair of the Social Democratic Party, remaining in the position until the next party convention in September. Her party came in third in the parliamentary election held on Sunday. Marin said she'll lead her party in the consultations about the formation of a new government before continuing on as an ordinary lawmaker in Parliament. Marin also reaffirmed that she won't run for the presidency in the election next year. Ukraine says it'll discuss the prospects of joining NATO at a meeting with the alliance. Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba says another key agenda of the meeting will be the acceleration of the delivery of military assistance. The NATO-Ukraine Commission will also discuss stable support for Ukraine from NATO member states. Tens of millions of Americans are bracing for another round of severe weather. Blizzards, high winds, and tornadoes are all threats, with areas still reeling from last Friday's tornadoes also in the path of these new storms. Tony Waterman has more.
About 70 million Americans are facing severe weather risks on Tuesday into Wednesday, stretching from central Texas right up to the Great Lakes. And one of the biggest concerns is the threat of nighttime tornadoes, which meteorologists say could pop up in parts of southern Missouri, Texas, and Arkansas. These nocturnal twisters are particularly dangerous and deadly because people are, of course, sleeping and they can be unaware that they need to seek shelter. And these tornadoes could hit in the very same regions where dozens of twisters tore through last weekend, leaving 32 people dead. And officials are urging people in this danger zone to make sure that they can receive warning information like the alerts issued on cell phones before they go to bed.
Official data shows that Chinese poverty relief platform Futin832.com saw its sales add up to over 35 billion yuan, or roughly $5 billion by the end of March. The online e-commerce platform sold over 300,000 kinds of commodities for more than 800 formerly impoverished counties, benefiting nearly 3 million rural households. First launched in early 2020, the platform is supported by several government bodies, including the Ministries of Finance and Agriculture. In tennis, Rafael Nadal and Carlos Alcaraz have both pulled out of the Monte Carlo Masters. Nadal continues to recover from a hip issue that ended his Australian Open title defense in the second round in January. He was forced to skip the Masters 1000 event in Indian Wells last month and the Miami Open that ended last week. Alcaraz pulled out of the event because of his hand and back injury problems. He was set to battle Novak Djokovic for the top rank in the French Open warm-up tournament. And that's the news. I'm Shane Bigham.
Beyond the headlines, this is World Insight.
Hello, and welcome to World Insight with me, Tian Wei. Children are the most vulnerable group to multiple layers of challenges the world is facing today, from wars and conflicts to climate change and food and energy crisis. Karen Bushong, who is the UNICEF Deputy Executive Director, tried to explain to me recently how her organization, together with its global partners, including China, has been searching for the most efficient solutions to support children worldwide today, and how China, as one of the largest developing countries in the world, can better share its experiences and resources for the children in the global south. Karen, what a pleasure to see you once again.
Thank you so much. I'm happy to be here.
I noticed that, during lunches and dinners here, coffee breaks, people have a lot to talk about, isn't it?
Yeah, and that's so nice. I really feel welcome here. It's my first time in Boao, and first time at the forum, and it's lovely to see so many old friends and making new friends, hearing different perceptions, so it's really good.
I really think it's an enriching process, especially when we are dealing with a big theme like this, uncertain world of solidarity and cooperation. This is so crucial right now.
It is. I feel there are so many headwinds at this moment. We have, of course, more or less an existential crisis with the climate. We have wars, new wars, old conflicts. We have the effects still of the pandemic, the COVID pandemic. So it's a great theme to be talking about solidarity and cooperation. So I think we have to be willing to look at those who need us most. And those are the people usually who have fallen into poverty again during the COVID period, or those who suffered from war, or children who have not been able yet to go to school. So I feel that big commitment from UNICEF to show our passion and to bring everyone on board.
The world has been experiencing shocks after shocks after shocks. What does that mean to your cause, especially taking care of the most vulnerable, shall we say, yet the most promising, the children?
Yeah, so if I compare with 10 years ago, some 10 years ago we were all thinking everything is on track. Yes, we have a war here or there, but everything is on track. We have more children in school than ever before. We have more children vaccinated than ever before. And during the pandemic, with the school closures and some of the health centers closed around the world, immunization rates were falling backwards. We now have millions of children that haven't received a single doses of vaccines. So many children out of school. And many who are out of school, they don't have the means to be online, to follow digital or online education. So there is a lot of catch-up to do. So for us at UNICEF, it means wherever we can to bring solar power, wherever we can, we look for every child, bring that child back to school, and make sure the child stays at school. Also, we are doing what we can to bridge that the number of children who are without vaccines, to have them fully immunized again. And we need the support of everyone. It's not only UNICEF or one government, all the governments around the world, but also we need private sector, we need the multilateral development banks, we need everyone to step up.
The children today are also facing a different picture that just compared to 20 years ago. We are having multiple layers of crisis. What does that mean to your cause once again to help the children?
Yeah, I think the biggest crisis of all actually may be the climate crisis. So for children it is important that they also have a future to look forward to. It starts with education. In fact, early education. As soon as children get 2 or 3 years old, that they play with other children, that they are confident, that they learn social skills, that they learn to express themselves, and then they are ready for school. Once in school, I think, yes, we can do online learning, but it needs to be also in classroom. It needs to be a one-on-one. The way we are talking would not be possible if it would be with only a screen or a device. So we need that personal and that human contact at least until 10, 12 years old. And once we are there, then we should provide children first, of course, the foundational skills, numeracy, literacy, digital skills, know how to manage your devices, but also know how to search for information, but also, I would say, life skills, not transferable skills, but make children really confident. So if you can express yourself, if you are a good negotiator, a communicator, that will make you ready for lifelong learning. And last but not least, I think vocational training, whether it's technical or for expertise or vocation, is also important. So that trajectory, if we invest in that right now, and we do that in a way that is climate smart, then we are really making it much more easier for the generation that is very young now, or those that still will be born.
China has managed to eliminate extreme poverty over the past years after decades of hard work. But now China is also very cautious to prevent some of those populations that have been away from extreme poverty to fall back again. Now, at this critical juncture, what do you make of the practices being used? And also, how do you see the future of developing countries trying to eliminate extreme poverty?
Yeah, so it's so sorry, but during the pandemic, really hundreds of millions of people slided back into poverty and some in extreme poverty. So for us at UNICEF, it's very important that there are sometimes cash programs for the families that are most deprived. We work very well with the World Bank, for example, in Yemen or Afghanistan, to give stipends to those families that have children in school age or babies, and they need additional financial support. So we provide that kind of subsistence, including for teachers and health workers in those countries that need it most. But we can't do that, of course, everywhere. So for governments, it's important to have social safety nets and also to look beyond income poverty. We also need to look that children can access, and their caregivers and parents, of course, too, to good health systems, education, so that it doesn't become a vicious cycle. In China, it's a very good example. The government lifted hundreds of millions of people out of poverty, extreme poverty, in quite a short period of time, if you look at history. And that is a great example. And I think once lifted out of poverty and provided the access to quality education, good health systems, that's really a turning point for any generation to give more and to do better in life.
How do you see what is the best way for China, as one of the biggest developing countries, to work to share the practices, but also with the knowledge that everybody is different, so everybody can have their own solutions?
Yeah, so I think for China, on the one hand, the government have had also quite a few meetings with the government of China during these days here in Boao, all very constructive and positive. So on the one hand, there is clearly an ask for UNICEF to still continue with programs in China. Yet also China has developed so much. The lessons learned from lifting people out of poverty in quite a speedy time. Also that gigantic knowledge that you have on online learning. There are so many platforms where really good content for learning is available. That is something that China could help make available to others as well.
You know, you talk about learning. That's really a great way of looking at how we human beings live and how we together can function in the future. I wonder whether we are together very young in a way. We are in the process of learning, isn't it?
Yes, I think the biggest challenge is to accept that every day we can learn something, and then technologies can complement it. If we push everything away and we obviously do everything the same way, there is no development, no innovation. So I find it very important, including at UNICEF, that we always look how can we do things better, faster, maybe cheaper, how can we add value, and if we do that consistently, we get better end products, and therefore we can serve children better.
Also about learning, that is about mutual learning.
Yes.
And mutually inspirational. But it takes minds which are open to do that. Many suggest that our world is so complicated these days. Nothing has an ultimate solution, and yet if we think hard and connect the dots, there might be solutions just right in front of us.
At the opening of the Boao conference, the forum, we heard almost everyone, all the fantastic speakers talk about open mind, openness, willingness to learn.
Peace, development, open to learn.
Yes, so I think that combination is a beautiful recipe. If we work together in the theme of solidarity and cooperation, we can really change the world. I am convinced of it.
I'm so glad. The partnership between China and UNICEF for decades.
Yes.
And I saw that partnership has been extremely strong during the rainy days, during the sunny days. How do you see the future of partnership between UNICEF and China?
Yeah, as you say, May, it is 40 plus years that we partner with the government of China. So from a big supply operation in the beginning, iodizing salt and penicillin and I don't know what, it's now a much more relationship that we talk about policies, we do research together, we publish data together, So the evolution is there, yet we also, at the same time, we talk about, okay, poverty, maybe economic poverty is much less, but we also need to make sure that everyone is included. Children with special needs, disabled children living in very remote areas. So the government likes us to stay, and they look long-term for our program and partnerships. And we at UNICEF, we believe that the time is also there that we take a fresh look at how we work together. So we hope that we can work alongside the government of China, also for South-South cooperation, maybe for people-to-people collaboration, people from China with other countries in the neighborhood, so that we also look beyond the borders of China while we continue working in China. And I think my meetings with the government have been very positive and constructive. So I'm quite confident that over time we find a way how to do that.
My conversation with Deputy Executive Director of UNICEF. This is World Insight with me, Tian Wei. Coming up, my latest interview with Harvard professor Graham Allison, who asked the question, can America and China escape the Thucydides trap in his well-known book, Destined for War? Next.
Beyond the headlines, this is World Insight.
Welcome back. This is World Insight with me, Tian Wei. Due to geopolitical, historical, and cultural differences, the level of misunderstanding and suspicions rises between China and the U.S. today. Is there a chance to overcome the current hostilities and distrust and together be responsible for the peace and development of the world? My conversation with Harvard professor Graham Allison, who asked the question, can America and China escape the Thucydides trap in his well-known book, Destined for War? Professor Allison is the founding dean of the John F. Kennedy School of Government at Harvard University. Last time we saw each other was at China Development Forum, and now at World Forum for Asia. It is the two largest international events for the year 2023 at the very beginning of it, isn't it?
That's interesting, and it certainly is a very good, very vivid evidence that China is back, and China is opening up, and now people can see each other and come and visit and talk is the way we're doing. So,
and you're back.
Unfortunately, I have not been here for 3 years, so many friends who I used to be able to talk to every 3-4 months, I haven't seen them personally for 3 years. I much like to see people in all dimensions.
And I also see your shoes now.
Exactly. Yeah.
So it's wonderful. Having said that, how important it is, do you see, Professor, this person-to-person, in-person communication?
I think it's easy to misunderstand, but I think it's extremely important because when people don't establish a relationship on the basis of some continuous conversation over time and even respect for each other and even friendship, the ability to misperceive and misconceive is exaggerated. So it's one thing to hear that you said something or you hear that I said something and then you imagine what I might have meant and then I imagine what you, and then once you get started around that, the differences can be wildly exaggerated.
What do you think, Professor, through your communications here, for example, at the China Development Forum and now this time at the World Forum, are some of the most important misunderstandings, misconceptions that need to be cleared up immediately so that both sides will be able to implement the consensus reached by the two presidents last time at the G20 summit?
That's a very good question. So I think the first misunderstanding, I don't necessarily know about Biden's views or Xi's view personally, but first misunderstanding in the government is to begin with reality that in big governments, they often do things that nobody intended and nobody expected because this stuff happens. Secondly, in the real world, accidents and incidents happen. Not anybody intended. So from an event, don't jump to an intention. First, try to understand understand what actually happened. The second thing on the American side, in American politics today, things have become almost hysterical. So Republicans and Democrats listen to what they say about each other. Republicans say that if Biden is reelected, that's the end of American democracy. The whole country is at stake. Democrats say that if Republicans were to regain the presidency, that the country is finished. So you look at this and you say, what? What are they? So the answer is the American politics is at a stage right now that is hysterical, in my view. For two wise leaders, this is not the world we would have chosen, but this is the world we have. We have to live with a world in which incidents and accidents happen. We have to live with a world in which we'll try our best not to have mistakes, but mistakes are going to happen, for sure.
But people would say, why don't you clean your own house?
But I'd say that on in trying to understand the American side of the picture, to say, I can imagine a candid conversation between two parties, a good Chinese and a good Rand, that says, I'm the American. Our politics is completely crazy. I'm describing to you, this is what it is. That's where I live every day. Do you have any suggestions about what? These are the realities that leaders have to find a way to deal with, because this relationship is so important that we have to manage it even if American politics is crazy, and even if incidents and accidents happen, and even.
So here comes the issue of credibility, about how much, if consensus are being reached between the very top level diplomacy at the president's level, then whether it will be implemented or not. And here in this part of the world, I'm sure through many conversations you had, Professor, people are confused, to say the least, why these consensus are not being implemented at all, and why one after another, quote-unquote, incidents pop up in the way of implementing these consensus.
I talked to a number of people in Beijing when I was there, and that's a common refrain. So I would say, I think both parties perceive and misperceive the extent to which they agreed to something and it either is being implemented or not implemented. And so again, back to your point about communication. So you and I agree that we're supposed to do something, and here's the intent. And now you go off and do this, and I go off and do that, and you say, well, he's not doing what I thought he was going to do, and I say, she's not doing what I thought she was going to do. So what do we need to do? We have to talk about it.
Yes.
And then we have to be more specific. So now when we reach an agreement and we say, here is our purpose, this is what we're trying to do, and here's our red line, we're not going to do this, you're not going to do this, I'm not going to do this, and here is 5 specific things, be very specific, that you are going to do, and here's 5 you're not going to do, and then here's 5 specific things I'm going to do, and then I'm not going to do. And now when we meet, we say, I don't think you did this item, and you say, well, if you look carefully, I did.
I want to ask specifically to follow up about your book, Thucydides' Trap, because you were writing a book, if I understand right, with the intention to prevent Thucydides' Trap, to prevent hot war, and also to prevent the Cold War.
Right.
Yeah, but there were a lot of misunderstanding and misuse of what you wrote in the book, that people thought we are in the middle of one of those traps. So what do you say to those who are reading your books? What can be the takeaway from your perspective for the readers at this point?
So the big takeaway is that in some sense we are in a Thucydidean rivalry. We can't wish that away. That's inevitable. China is a meteoric rising power. U.S. is a colossal ruling power. When a rising power threatens to displace a ruling power, stuff happens. That's life. This is going to be the fiercest rivalry history has ever seen. That's on the one hand.
How do you know it is the fiercest? How do you know? That seems to be assumed.
Right. This is going to be the fiercest rival because China is risen further, faster, and is bigger and stronger than any rival in history. And the U.S. is bigger and stronger colossally. It's a global power. Certainly it's an indie power since we're, and even more than that, because we're in that technologies like the US has. So the rivalry is baked into the situation. That's a Thucydides dynamic. On the other hand, it's not necessary that ends in war. 4 of the 16 cases was no war. So we can learn a lot of lessons from those and apply them in this case. And specifically, if wise people in Beijing and Washington think about it, you ask yourself, is there more reasons why the U.S. and China should be competitors, that's on the one hand, or alternatively, why they should be cooperating, that's on the other hand. So I suggest in one of the at the development forum, take a page of paper and write compete on one side. And here are the reasons why they have to be competitors. And turn it over. Cooperate. So the items why they have to cooperate. So they have to cooperate to survive by preventing a war that would destroy both of us. So that's a pretty powerful motivator. They have to cooperate to have a biosphere, a climate that we can survive in. Otherwise, greenhouse gases make it impossible for all of us.
But we saw a lot of lip service. Yes. Over the past few years, since many have been reading your book. But at the same time, how to make sure those cooperation are really happening. That is the key from the very beginning of our conversation. How to implement the consensus and the good possibilities. That once again comes back to the question whether there is trust and how we build trust. What do you think is the best way?
Well, that's back to the same old story, but I think people talking to each other candidly, privately, in the first instance, and going through things and saying, if you continue doing this, at some point, this is going to interact with that, and this is going to interact with that, and you and I may find ourselves somewhere we absolutely do not want to be. So if you would like to take a chance on it, keep going. But otherwise, and then I say, well, I can't control this, I'm not in control of McCarthy. He's going to do what he's going to do. And you say, well, okay, so now I have to figure out how to live with that. So there'll be a lot of things about the behavior of China and the behavior of the U.S. that the other will not like. But if my survival requires me to find ways to cooperate with you, even if you and I are rivals, and even if I'm not sure about whether I trust you, and your survival requires you to cooperate with me, survival is a pretty powerful instinct if we for intelligence. So I think that it's very important. The purpose of Thucydides' book, and actually the purpose of Thucydides' book, is to remind people business as usual, diplomacy as usual, history as usual. So that should motivate us. We don't want a history as usual. We want to create no war, because no war is necessary in this case for my very own survival.
My latest interview on the sidelines of World Forum with Professor Graham Allison from Harvard University. And that's all we have for today. I'm Tian Wei. On behalf of my team, thanks for being with us. Bye for now. Want to learn about world affairs in a more laid-back and accessible manner? Join insiders, experts, and analysts in the casual setting of the Chat Lounge to share their personal experiences and opinions on major events and hot issues. Subscribe to Chat Lounge for free on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your favorite podcasts.
Wondered what's actually going on in Africa through the perspective of an African? How are things really going between China and Africa? What's the narrative of this relationship? Well, get a perspective with China-Africa Talk. Hear from African diplomats, entrepreneurs, academics, Chinese natives, and more. Get on our wavelength every week to find out what's real with China-Africa Talk. Find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and more. We'll see you there.
From north to south, east to west, people in China are chasing their dreams and leaving their mark. Want to know how they beat the odds and made a difference? Footprints brings you the true life stories of their journey. Experience the musical classics of the East. Mingle with the masters of Chinese music.
的这种美召唤了女性。
因为蒙古那个被称为马背为主，小小二胡。
Music talks. Witness the sound of antiquity and modernity.
Ideas matter. This is Dialogue.
Hello and welcome to Dialogue. French President Emmanuel Macron and the European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen are in China this week for talks with Chinese leaders during a 3-day trip. Despite differences, there has been a rise in diplomatic activity between Chinese and European leaders recently. What are the core issues of these meetings, and what more can we make of these recent high-level talks? To discuss these issues and more, I'm glad to be joined by Feng Zhongping, Director of the Institute of European Studies at the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences, Harvey Zoldan, Senior Fellow at the Center for China and Globalization, and Carl Fei, Professor of the BI Norwegian Business School. Welcome to the discussion. Zhongping, I will start with you. So we are going to see important engagement between the Chinese leaders and the European leaders. So what to watch?
Okay, I think the President of France has taken this trip, and the Commission President, you are right, altogether. I think they both have taken this trip quite seriously. Not only because this is the first in 3 years. Don't forget the COVID infection. But also there are very important issues between Chinese leaders and European leaders. I think the President of France and Commission President von der Leyen, they both would like very much to talk with Chinese leaders on 2 issues, especially. Number one, how to overcome this Ukraine crisis. I think Europe is the direct victim of this ongoing conflict, and we couldn't see the end of this. People have feel hopeless about this, and so this is probably the priority for European leaders, particularly the French president. He expressed, many times he wants to say this quick end of this crisis. He has done a lot of homework before his departure, to China. He made a phone call to Ukraine president, and he made a phone call just hours before his trip to China with Joe Biden, the U.S. president. He talked about Ukraine crisis. And the second thing, I think in his mind, or in both of them's mind, is economic issues, trade cooperation. China for Europe are 2 biggest economies in the world. Let's have to be realistic about this. So if we want to have both a pandemic recovery to overcome this Ukraine crisis difficulties, the 2 sides, the 2 economies need to have a constant discussion.
So if you look at the bilateral issue beyond the Ukraine crisis, we know that it's reported that the French delegation composes of 50 to 60 business executives. So can we say the trade and investment relationship between China and the European Union are also very important for both sides? Harvey, let me put this question to you.
Sure. Can you repeat it, please?
Yes, we say, of course, the Ukraine crisis is a priority for the European leaders. But at the same time, we see the French delegation, there are 50 to 60 business executives along with the President Macron. So we can say, I would say European side is also paying close attention to investment and trade between the 2 sides.
Yeah, sure. I mean, this is all about business as well as the other issues that were already discussed. So these leaders that are coming are not just coming to make theoretical proposals. They've probably been working on bilateral issues and business deals for a long time now. And since things are restarting after COVID, they're hoping that they can have some win-win cooperation with China. And I think that President Macron has a good chance of helping them, because President Macron, unlike the EU's position, he's kind of a maverick and an independent, and he does things in a French way. The French have always had this independent streak. So I think that actually helps them to do business, and I believe that it'll be a good shot in the arm for both China and for France if some of these deals get done.
So we have clear back. Okay, John Kim again here. You know, the Chinese ambassador to the European Union said that in terms of the importance of the bilateral relationship, he said that the way Beijing and Brussels manage their relations will, to a very large extent, determine the future of the world. I wonder what's your interpretation to that remark?
Okay, I agree actually with that remark. I think the importance of China-European relations, including China's relations with France, Germany, and member states of Europe, it not only matters relations between two sides, because it matters about a bigger powers relations. It matters about the global development and cybersecurity. Number one, because first, European Union is it's a global economic power. We couldn't think about just the one member state. They have a big single market. And the European Union, United States, China are the three biggest economic powers in the world. So economically, if China and Europe could work together, it will make sure the stability of the world economic situation. Secondly, China and Europe wants to do something in terms of global governance, jointly addressing climate change issues, for example. Also, energy transition, this is a key word, both in China and in Europe. So, energy transition and digital transition, if you like, in Europe they call double transitions. Green transitions we call energy transitions, and also digital transitions. These are very important issues, not only for China but also for Europe, but also for the whole world. So, and you mentioned the Ukraine crisis. Ukraine crisis is the biggest issue in the world now. Both China and Europe would very much like to do something together. So if we could stable the world in terms of economic development, in terms of security, it's great for the whole world.
Harvey, back to you. I want to have your opinion on this relationship and their importance to the international world, let's say to the international community in terms of peace and development. Yes, we have a lot of challenges, for example, climate change, banking crisis, inflation, Ukraine crisis. But at the same time, probably, scholars are suggesting we should have a long-term vision into the future about the role to be played by China and the European Union to stabilize the situation, to bring all countries together, and to work for the best interests of the entire world. What do you make of that?
Yeah, that's absolutely correct, Shindla. As I see it, we're involved here in a global trilateral model. You've got the U.S. and China, let's say, on each side of each other, and in between you have the new political entity called the European Union. And I believe that the European Union is actually the fulcrum or the future balancing point between the U.S. and China, and can help facilitate to solve some of the problems that are coming about. Now, I find it very amusing that a subtext of the meeting is about EU strategic independence from the U.S. If you look at the U.S. media carefully, they're falsely accusing the country of having an opportunity. They're seeing this as an opportunity, this meeting of EU and China, for China to drive a wedge between China and the EU. But it's not about that at all. That's completely wrong. So while the EU and U.S. interests do converge on many issues, they don't align 100%. And the realignment is changing over time. So you take the U.S. attempt of using these long-arm regulations to drive a stake through the heart of Chinese tech leaders like Huawei by denying them advanced technologies such as microchip fabs in the Netherlands and Japan. So rather than competing fairly, it's no wonder that many EU countries and others are bristling at U.S. arrogance. But at the moment, they're going along to a large extent. But the EU is in a position to exercise its strategic autonomy. And I believe in the days, years, and decades to come, the EU is going to do exactly that. And that's why they're as important, as you said.
Well, Carl, the Chinese ambassador Fu Cong to the EU said, the biggest risk for the China-EU relationship is weaponizing trade issues for geopolitical or even ideological purposes. How bad can it be if trade issues were really weaponized for geopolitical, ideological purposes here?
Well, unfortunately, I think we have been seeing that. Especially between the U.S. and China, since it seems that the only thing that the Republicans and Democrats can agree on is to be against China at the moment, and that pushes more of that. Actions to sort of discriminate some against China, both on the part of the EU and the U.S., for example, in the chips that were mentioned previously, are actually causing simply, understandably, China to feel that they need to develop more ability to do things on their own and produce their own chips. And this is not efficient. China is specializing in producing historically sort of lower-end chips for simpler devices. The U.S. and countries like South Korea are producing more advanced chips. And actually, the U.S. imports a lot of chips from China, and China imports a lot of chips from the U.S. It's just of different types. As Michael Porter, the famous Harvard professor, tells us, it's not that there's one best industry or one best part of an industry to be in, but depending on the resources and capabilities a particular country has, countries should specialize in different segments of an industry. And in addition, China, of course, has much of the world supply of some raw special metals that are needed in production of chips. If they would ever decide to put an embargo on those going to the EU and the U.S., those countries would be in big trouble. But fortunately, China has shown that they want to be open to free trade and have not done that. And that's rather ironic since, in most of history we've seen the U.S. being the leaders of pushing free trade forward.
Well, Carl, of course, along with van der Leyen, the EU Commission President, is the French delegation, French President Macron. So tell us, what to expect in terms of China-French, probably more deals, more cooperation in terms of trade and investment?
So I think at the moment the fact that relations are not ideal, unfortunately, between China and the U.S. gives a great opportunity for Europe to make closer relations with China and France to make closer relations with China. What I'm really hoping might happen is that there might be discussions restarting about the EU-China comprehensive agreement on investment, or CAI as it's often called, which was all but approved at the end of 2020, but has more or less been frozen since then. I'm not overly optimistic that this is going to be happening instantly, but hopefully we can make some steps towards that, and that would have been a great agreement for the European Union because it gave much greater access to a variety of industries in China. It also gave greater protection in terms of intellectual property, and it helped Chinese companies to have more fair and open access to Europe. So I hope that we might see beginnings of some talking along that. But I think the most important thing is that these leaders are meeting. With the pandemic, most people haven't been meeting that much in person for a long time. You and I were at the Bal Forum last week, and it was great that many people could meet in person again. And I hope that these government leaders meeting will help build a relationship to make it easier to smooth over difficulties moving forward. Finally, I should mention that I think the real opportunity that should be focused on first is the opportunity of different green technologies. I think that this is something that the EU, particularly France, and China can surely agree on, and for that matter, Norway, a country right now, is a real leader in green technologies, and so there are lots of different players that can come together. We all have to work together on that, and I should point out that one of the policies that I think China's had, which has had the most positive effect, has been the Belt and Road Initiative, which is now celebrating, of course, its 10th anniversary. And while initially it was sort of, what can we do to help other countries and what can we do to help Chinese companies go abroad, it's really exciting that there's now this part that is the Green Belt and Road, which is paying attention to doing things, in an environmental friendly way. And we've seen China helping, countries along this, such as Thailand and energy improvement, and for example in Africa, Ethiopia with a light train network. So I hope that we'll see China continuing to put more focus on this Green Belt and Road, because at the moment it's still a small part of the activity of the Belt and Road Initiative, and I think that indeed France has a lot to offer there. In fact, among the more than 50 leaders that are coming along in the delegation are some leaders of some leading French energy companies, so hopefully they can have some positive discussions in that area.
Well, thank you, Carl. Well, former U.S. President Donald Trump has pleaded not guilty to charges involving illegal hush money payments to an adult film star in 2016 ahead of his main presidential bid. And the 14th District Court has charged Trump with 34 felony counts of falsifying business records in the first degree, making Trump the first former U.S. president to ever be criminally charged. So what's going to happen to the former president? Can Trump still run for or even be elected U.S. president? And how will this legal process impact the presidential election next year? So Harvey, first of all, tell us, Trump has appeared in court. What do you make of his appearance, the first appearance in court?
Well, I make of it that he's very worried. You could see from his demeanor and his rambling speech afterwards when he got back to Mar-a-Lago that he's very worried. Because for years, for decades, Trump has evaded the law. He used to have a lawyer who taught him how to do this, who's named Roy Cohn. Roy Cohn was the person who helped Senator McCarthy engineer the Red Scare in the 1950s. And Roy Cohn is the person who taught Donald Trump to evade the law, both as a businessman and, even though he's now dead, as a president. So I think that he can feel the hot breath of the law breathing down his throat and his back. And I think that you could see from Manhattan's welcome of Trump that most of the people who were outside the courthouse were anti-Trump, that the couple people who came, like Marjorie Taylor Greene and the Line congressman, were drowned out by the rest of the crowd. So I think that while there's a partisan element, I think the wheels of justice are turning, and they're turning in the direction of Donald Trump. And I believe with all the cases that will be coming up, he's going to be in court for most of the rest of his life, and this will have personal consequences for him and also systemic consequences for the United States of America as well.
However, people will ask, these issues or the harsh money, harsh payments happened years ago. Why the legal case now?
Well, part of it is that the wheels of justice turn very slowly generally. And in this case, they turn even more slowly because it's the first case against a sitting U.S. president. So the prosecutors involved want to have the strongest possible case. And so that's why it's taking such a long time. And it's taking even longer in the other cases in Georgia and on the federal level, as well as another case in New York. So the stakes are high, and nobody wants to ruin the democracy as much as it is in the process.
So, Carl, if you look at the politics in the United States in terms of this legal case, moderate Republicans, speaking of them rallying behind Trump, like Mitt Romney, who voted actually for the impeachment against Trump twice, when Trump was the president. He criticized the charges. He talked about political agenda, more political persecution there. What do you make of that?
So first, I'm really happy to see that the charges are coming forward now. I think it's a real testament to the U.S. System that regardless of who you are, that charges come forward. If they're deemed to be worthy of that. I think some of the Republican criticizing of the charges coming forward is that it has been a while. We're talking about something that happened in 2016, but of course. As was mentioned, really the prosecutors wanted to make sure everything was absolutely tight, and I really do respect that and think that is correct. And I hope moving forward, lots of effort will continue to be placed to make sure that this is not too partisan. But I think this is the fact that it's sort of happening now, and also the fact that these are not the biggest charges. Trump has arguably larger charges than some of the other cases. And some people say, well, is it really worth it for a president? But I think it is. We need to show that everyone is treated fairly. And I think the interesting question will be, how does this affect Trump in his bid to be the president again? It doesn't look like the Constitution prevents a president who is, or a candidate for president who has been either indicted or convicted from running. That's not one of the three criteria, which are just that you're a U.S. citizen, have lived in the U.S. for at least 14 years or at least 35 years of age as well. So he still could run. And I think it's a little bit of an open question. I think some extremists of the Republican Party really rally much more behind him now. So again, some report there. I think we'll see some moderates, feeling that this could help them to move away from him.
As a Chinese, observer, Zhong Ping, as an outsider, how do you see this legal case against this is the first time there are charges against a former U.S. president, and also, of course, related politics between the two parties, Democrats and Republicans.
Okay, Chindo, what I can tell is many Europeans would be very carefully watched about this case. People who I met from Europe told me they were very much scared about the returning of Trump into the White House again. So they would be very carefully watch this case. They would very much not like to see Trump to come back to become the president of the United States again, because I think this will be a disaster for the United States, for transatlantic relations, and for the whole world. Shindo.
Well, Harvey, as you said, Trump probably will spend a lot of time in court. But what about the likelihood, like he will, probably be put into prison, stand behind the bars?
I think if he's treated like any other American citizen, who's not a president. Presidents, when they're serving, get a pass on many things. But I think of these like other citizens, that there's a high probability that he'll have to go to court. If he does have to go to court and go to prison. If he doesn't go to prison, it's because he will try to delay, as he always does, with appeals and more appeals, and that those court cases may, in the sense, outlive him, and when he dies, the court cases die as well. But I think there's an excellent chance that he'll be convicted, he'll be fined, he could be imprisoned, and it's right that he could run for re-election as president. But what's not settled at all is if he wins the presidency, nobody expected him to win the last time, and nobody expects him, I think, to win now. It's unlikely. But if he wins, it's an open question whether somebody who's been convicted of a felony can serve as president. And this is something that's going to keep legal scholars and the Department of Justice busy, and is probably keeping them busy today at this very moment.
You earlier mentioned about there are consequences for this case in terms of probably the election, in terms of the politics of this nation. Tell us more about that.
Okay, well, I think it's a two-edged sword. In one hand, that the fact that he's been indicted has helped Trump, because